During week 9, we're going to start talking about a specialized type of poem called the sonnet. And for a lot of students, they hear the word poem, especially the word sonnet, and want to run from the room because sometimes they seem quite intimidating. So what I want to accomplish with this video is to help you understand better how sonnets are put together and some of the thought process that Shakespeare went through when he was writing some of his most famous sonnets. From an earlier exercise, you know that there are two types of sonnets that are the most prominent. One is the Petrarchan, which was developed by Petrarch, and it works better for the Italian language. Then the English used and developed the idea of a sonnet and made a format that worked better with the English language and its rhythms. And Shakespeare became a master of that style, so it no longer was known as the English sonnet. Instead, it became known as the Shakespearean sonnet. You'll also remember from that earlier exercise that a sonnet is a 14-line poem that uses a special rhythm called iambic pentameter, and it follows a very strict rhyme scheme. So in order to write a sonnet, it's almost like putting together a puzzle if you're writing, because you have to make your thoughts fit this very structured type of poem. So first, I'm going to take this well-known sonnet by Shakespeare, and he titled his with numbers. So this is Sonnet 73. First, I'm just going to show you what that structure looks like on the page, and then second, we're going to take some time to see what's going on in the sonnet and make some sense of it. So the first thing to know about sonnets is that they're written in iambic pentameter. And an iamb is a series of two syllables, sometimes called a foot, where the first syllable is unstressed and the second syllable is stressed. Now, the iambic rhythm is very inherent in the English language. When we speak, we naturally stress some words or parts of words and we leave other parts unstressed. And so we can play around with that idea and create a very rhythmic sound. If you listen to some of the modern rap or hip-hop songs, they play with that same idea. So this is not outdated by any means. So taking a look at iambic pentameter, that means that the iamb is repeated 5 times. Penta means 5. So you're going to have a total of 10 syllables in each line. I'm going to read it and overstress the rhythm so that you can hear that. So this is the first quatrain, which just means the first 4 lines. And listen to the rhythm. That time of year thou mayst in me behold, when yellow leaves or none or few do hang upon those boughs which shake against the cold, bear ruined choirs where late the sweet bird sang. Now, of course, we don't stress things that dramatically, but hopefully you could hear the da-da, 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 da-da kind of rhythm. That's iambic pentameter, where you have 10 syllables in that very rhythmical pattern. So, first thing then a poet has to do is make sure that each line of his poem, or her poem, fits that da-da, 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 da-da rhythm. And you can see that Shakespeare's does occasionally, you see what he does? He plays around with words to shorten them up or lengthen them a little bit. So instead of ruined, which has 2 syllables, he changed that into ruined to get it down to 1 syllable. So Shakespeare cheats just a little bit, so you know. The other thing that is very strict about sonnets is the rhyme scheme. And by rhyme scheme, it's the pattern of rhyme used. So let's look at just this first quatrain again. Look at the last words. Behold rhymes with cold. And hang rhymes with sang. So this first, quatrain follows this pattern. We'll call this first line A, and then, this line that rhymes with it we'll also call A, and this line, hang, we'll call B, and then the other line that rhymes with it we'll call B as well. So it follows the A-B rhyme scheme. You'll notice that the second quatrain, the second set of 4, follows the same type of pattern. The first ending word is day, rhymes with away. Second word, west, rhymes with rest. So if we were going to put in the scheme on this one, we'd label this line C and this line C because they rhyme, and this line D and this line D because they rhyme. Day, away, west, rest. And then look at the third quatrain and you see the exact same thing. Fire rhymes with expire, and lie rhymes with by. So let's finish out the rhyme scheme here. That's E, F, E, F. Then the last two lines of a sonnet are known as the couplet, which means just two lines that rhyme. Couple meaning two. And you notice that they rhyme as well. So it ends with strong and long. So we'll label those as G, G. So I just labeled the rhyme scheme for you just so that you understand what's meant by rhyme scheme. So in, again, the sonnet, the Shakespearean sonnet, the first four lines are called the first quatrain. The second are called the second quatrain. The third set of four lines are called the third quatrain. And then it always ends with this nice little rhyming couplet, or last two lines. So we've got so far now the rhythm pattern that you have to follow, the iambic pentameter, you've got the rhyme scheme that you have to follow. And then the third thing that Shakespeare especially liked to work with is that he followed a specific pattern as far as what was being said in the sonnet. So usually in the sonnets, in the first quatrain, he would introduce some kind of situation, some predicament, something happening, and then the next two quatrains explore that situation a little bit. And then sometimes in the third quatrain, you'll see a little twist or a change or sometimes a question. And then the couplet at the end is going to answer it or resolve it. And that's usually what's focused on in a sonnet. So that'll give you a little edge too when you are trying to work to understand what a sonnet's saying. So we've looked at this whole sonnet now. We've analyzed the rhythm, the rhyme. We've taken a look at the format. The next step now is just plain making sense of what's being said in this. So let's try that. Let's take a look at the full first quatrain. That time of year thou mayst in me behold, when yellow leaves or none or few do hang, upon those boughs which shake against the cold, bear ruined choirs where late the sweet birds sang. So I'm going to stop there and just explore this a little bit. You notice he's using lots of imagery. We've got some sounds here. We've got sweet birds singing. We've got some feeling. We're talking about cold. And we've got descriptive pictures and images. We've got yellow leaves. We were talking about bare boughs in a tree. That is using a lot of imagery. So I'm going to think for a minute now. I was talking about yellow leaves and tree boughs shaking in the wind, where the little sweet birds used to sing, where late the birds sang. That reminds me of autumn. That reminds me of fall. So I think he's talking about fall there. In fact, I'm pretty sure of it, because yellow leaves, bare boughs in the tree, it's blowing, it's shaking against the cold, birds are no longer there. So I'm pretty sure that's what he's talking about. But now let's take a look at that first line. And the other thing to note about sonnets is that Shakespeare will put words out of the common order, just so it fits that rhythm scheme. So that time of year, thou mayst in me behold. I remember that thou means you. So that time of year, you might see in me. And what time of year was it that I figured this out to be again? It was autumn. So now the speaker in this sonnet is saying, you might notice, you might see in me this time of year, or you might notice autumn. And a lot of times when people talk about their lives, they'll liken it to the seasons. So if you're in the springtime of your life, you're very young. And just like the season of spring, it's very lively and light and joyful and fresh and new. And then summertime, you're kind of at the peak of your life and everything's going well and beautiful. But in autumn, well, that's when people are starting to age a little bit. So the speaker in this poem now is maybe thinking about aging, because he says, when you look at me, when you behold me, you might notice some autumn. You might notice that I'm aging. Okay, so there's where the situation's being presented. It's someone speaking to maybe his boyfriend or girlfriend and saying, well, maybe you started to notice that I'm aging a little bit. So let's take a look and see if that holds. Let's look at now the second quatrain. In me thou seest the twilight of such day, as after sunset fadeth in the west, which by and by black night doth take away, death's second self, that seals up all in rest. Okay, so now we're not talking about seasons anymore. So he's not comparing himself to a time of year, but now it looks like he's comparing himself to a time of day. So now, instead of seeing a time of year in me, now in me you see the twilight of such day. And when I think of twilight, I think of that time period right at the end of day, but before it's quite nighttime. Just kind of like autumn is at the end of the summer, but it's not quite winter yet. Now we're at twilight between day and night. As after sunset fades in the west. Okay. So I think what he's getting at here now, he's still talking about his age, but he's comparing it to the time of day. He's using another metaphor. So if the first quatrain was a metaphor comparing old age to autumn, now in this second quatrain, he's comparing old age to the time of day, going from twilight into black night. And what happens in black night? Well, it's kind of like death. Everything falls asleep. Everything's sealed up in rest. Boy, this is sounding pretty grim. I don't know where this might be headed. So let's take a look at the third quatrain. In me thou seest the glowing of such fire, that on the ashes of his youth doth lie, as the deathbed whereon it must expire, consumed with that which it was nourished by. Oh, wow, this is sounding even more dire here. So now he's not talking about a time of year, and he's not talking about a time of day. The new metaphor now that you might see is he's talking about fire and ashes. So now in me thou sees the glowing of such fire, that on the ashes of his youth doth lie. So now the metaphor is a fire that's almost burnt out, and now there's a bunch of ashes. So he's comparing his youth now has gone to ashes. There's just a glowing fire left. Again, he's referring to his age. And ultimately, along with age, of course, the fire must expire in its own ashes, and people age and eventually pass away as well. So, wow, this does not sound like a love sonnet whatsoever. You notice that Shakespeare often chose topics that made people stop and think a little bit. So in this one now, in these first three quatrains, he's very much established the idea of aging. Remember, in the first quatrain, he's using the time of year, autumn, to talk about old age. In the second quatrain, he's talking about the twilight, the ending of a day, to compare to old age. And now in the third quatrain, he's comparing his age to the glowing of a fire going slowly into ashes. So he's established now this kind of situation or problem that every time that this person looks at him, all they can see is that he's aging. So let's see how he's going to resolve this now. Remember, the couplet is what's going to resolve all of this and bring it to an end. This thou perceivest, which makes thy love more strong, to love that well which thou must leave ere long. Okay, so there is a positive ending to this. Let's take a little closer look at what he's trying to say. So again, he's talking to that person, and he's saying, you perceive this. You know this. If you perceive something, you know it, you understand it. So this that he's referring to is all this stuff up here that he was talking about before. That is becoming more and more obvious that he's aging, and just like the seasons and the end of day and the end of the fire, eventually he's going to fade away. So you know this. This thou perceivest. So you know that I'm old and that I'm not going to be around much longer. But this makes thy love more strong, to love that well which thou must leave ere long. To love something that much, even that you know it's going to be gone soon. So it's kind of a melancholy sonnet, but it does end on a positive note, because he's saying, you know all this stuff about me. You know that I'm getting older, but you still love me, even though you know that I'm probably not going to be around much longer. So that makes your love even stronger. So on that positive note, Shakespeare ends this sonnet. So hopefully this helped you a little bit getting through sonnets. You can see that they're not that tough, but you have to take them step by step. The other thing you can do while you're getting through this week, if you're really struggling with sonnets, please meet me in my Illuminate room and we can go through sonnets together. Think of it as kind of like working on a puzzle where you have to figure out what's being said. Be sure and check in under Contact Your Teacher so you can see my office hours and see the URL to get into my Illuminate room. Or as always, you can send me an email and we'll set up a special time. But keep in touch and hang in there and keep reading.